This is Conversations with Women in Sales, an award-winning podcast created by Barbara Giamanco, who hosted the first 67 episodes. Listen to interviews with amazing women about their journeys in their sales careers, often discussing sales leadership tips, ideas, and strategies. We aim to inspire women to consider a sales career and for some women to grow into sales leadership. Men, we appreciate your allyship. And now, your host, Lori Richardson.
I'm here today with Lori Harmon. Lori is Global Head of Business Development at Cloudflare. Welcome, Lori. It's so great to see you again.
Same here, Lori. I love that we're both Loris. So great to see you and great to catch up before we started recording today.
Yeah, we're the LORIs in sales, which is great. So I've known you for a while, and I was really excited when I heard that you went to Cloudflare and you've been there for a bit. And you're leading a team. And we talk a lot on this podcast about being in leadership, getting into leadership, and being a woman in sales and sales leadership. I'm curious to know, you didn't start out in leadership, and I wonder if you would share a little bit about your journey with us from back with some of the earlier companies that you've been with.
Absolutely. And thanks for asking about that. So you're right, Lori. I didn't start in leadership, although I did a panel last week at Cloudflare for Women's History Month, and we had a similar question. And what I said there was, I actually wanted to skip being an IC, but you can't, you have to get the experience. I wanted to skip that part, but I was an individual contributor but I did really want to get into management. I felt like I wanted to help people and I felt like I had leadership skills. So early on in my career, I did start talking to my manager about what's it going to take to get into management? What are some special projects I need to take on to learn leadership skills? Are there classes I need to take? So I would say that I took a really active role in my development.
So you were proactive.
Yes, very proactive about that.
Your leadership was good with that.
They were good with that. They were very supportive. They gave me suggestions on classes I could take, which the company sponsored as part of our leadership and development budget. And also they gave me special projects to work on. So I do project management. So I was convincing other people to do things, even though they didn't work for me. And it gave me a great opportunity to learn, okay, do I really want this, right? I thought I wanted it. And it turns out I did want to go into leadership. So I was very fortunate that I had the support and mentoring and sponsorship required to get into management fairly early in my career. And then I luckily continued on upward trajectory or sometimes sideways trajectory on your career to stay in leadership.
And didn't you have an engineering background?
Oh, yeah, that's a great story too, in my mind. So I majored in information systems in school and I was going to be a programmer. That's all I wanted to do. And during college, I was fortunate enough to get 2 co-ops with IBM. One was in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where I'm from. And then all these people there were from around the country. So I'm like, oh, wow, this is my ticket to somewhere else. So the next semester, I did a co-op in California. And the manager I had in California said, you're way too social to be in this particular role. We think you should go into sales. Why don't you go interview in San Francisco with at that time, they call it their marketing department.
Yeah.
So since I knew I wanted to move to California and I wanted to get a job with IBM, that had been a goal that I had actually in high school. I went up and interviewed with the marketing department. And fortunately, I was made an offer to be a systems engineer in their sales organization. So I took that role right out of college. And so I went from, I'm going to be a programmer to, no, I'm going into sales. And then an SC at IBM, I did some other roles, but I went on and eventually stayed in sales the majority of my career. So I found that, sales is often an accident. There are majors today in colleges for salespeople, but people really know they want to go into sales? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think because of all the bad press sales have gotten over all the years, even young people who probably don't see some of those salespeople like we've talked about that they talk about in movies. People still have a feeling about sales, which is sad, but that's great that you had people guiding you and suggesting that to you. That's really great. I'm happy to hear that. And I guess one red flag for people that are listening, if you don't have people around you encouraging you and say, hey, you might do this, or if you want to go into leadership and they go, you don't have this or that, and they're not supportive, wouldn't you say that's a red flag?
I completely agree, Lori. I think that is a big red flag. And if it's something you want to do in your career, everybody can't do everything. Maybe there is like truly you're not a fit for something, but I think you at least deserve getting support, having people explain to you maybe if they don't think you're a good fit, why. But more importantly, having the support so you can go test the waters and you can find it on your own, whether that's a move you want to make or after you make the move, if it's a move you want to stay in. So if you're not being supported, my advice would be maybe find a role where you are supported, whether that's a different role at the current company or possibly going to a different company, because it's really key for your leadership team and your manager to support you in your career development goals.
Yeah, that's what they're here for. So I laugh because I was a single parent and I was very focused on being an individual contributor and bringing in the money, making the money. I was all for it. And I never had anyone tap me on the shoulder for leadership. I was a team lead and I did become a sales manager at one place, but I was really good at sales. And I think that they didn't want me to lead. I had a lot of selfish managers that probably, self-serving, I guess is a better word, didn't really want me to go on to do something else. And I was very happy as an individual contributor, but I have a bias now that I'd love to see more women get into leadership and to know that you can ask and you can say, I'm interested in this. Can you help me create a path to do that? Or can you support me in that way? And the manager should be more supportive, like you said.
I think you make another great point, Lori. You're probably right. Like you were so good at sales, they wanted you to stay there. And sometimes when you change roles, especially going into a new company, you're labeled in that role maybe, and people don't necessarily go back. They don't look at your profile. They don't have your resume. How do they know like you can or want to do something else? So I think the key message in what you're saying is ask for what you want. Like you must ask your manager, ask your leadership, whatever your career goal is. You can't wait for people to just recognize you and promote you. You really need to ask for something, ask for what you want so you can work out a joint development plan. And if you're not asking, it's likely that you might get looked over. Maybe they're selfish and they want to keep you where you are because you're doing such a good job, or they're just not going to think about you in a different role. So I think that's a really key point for people, women and men, anybody.
Yeah. And men are just much better at saying, hey, Lori, I want your job someday. Tell me what I need to do that. And I've talked to women that would never do that. And you got to do it. You need to speak up for yourself and you need to know what you want. It makes you have to think about what do I want to do next and how do I want to plan it out? So that's very important. How do you think all the talk about artificial intelligence and chat GPT and on, how do you think that's changing our roles at all in the sales portion of the business?
Thanks for asking that one too. I am a huge fan of AI and ML. I think it's amazing. And what I think it does, I think it helps us. I know there's been talk, is it going to eliminate people's roles? Maybe it will eliminate a portion of what you're doing. Maybe there are some roles that will be eliminated. But I think it's really critical to embrace the new technology because, first of all, it handles a lot of the administrative work that either BDRs or sellers were doing in the past, right? So it offloads you to do things that are more value added to the potential buyers. The second thing is AI is providing incredible insights today. So it helps you understand as a seller or as a sales development person, who's really interested in my products today and where do I need to spend my time? Whereas before, you're flying blind, right? You're thinking, I need to spend all my time on the biggest deal. But maybe that biggest deal was in a good place and maybe you needed to go to the second biggest deal and spend more time there. And you didn't know that without the insights before, but now you know, here's where I should spend my time. Here's the buyers that have the most interest in my product and they are going to buy sooner than later. So this is where I need to go. From my perspective, I think salespeople that embrace this new technology, they're going to have more of a competitive advantage than people who don't. So I'm a big fan and I think it really helps us in our jobs.
Yeah, I'm a big fan too. I think it's going to eliminate order takers. So we don't need the way Amazon is an example where it eliminated somebody walking into a bookstore buying a book, but it hasn't eliminated those small boutique bookstores that have community in them, and that have a culture and that have people giving advice and insights and things like that. But it got rid of a lot of bookstores that really didn't have a lot of added value. And so it's something we'll see over time. But I think that if people are downsized, they're people that are not really adding value. And they're things that machines can do better than us. But we have the empathy and the intuition and the intelligence and the timing and body language and all those things that machines cannot do, at least now.
Yes, machines are not going to build relationships. They may not be the best at communicating, right? And so that's where salespeople today can really add a lot of value. And you need to be that trusted advisor, right? We've talked about this for a long time in sales, but there is no choice now. If you're not the trusted advisor, you're probably not going to win.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think the tech stack is going to get a little tighter?
Oh, absolutely. That's something I've seen every company. I was at NetApp previously and I'm at Cloudflare now. And if you're a CFO, you're looking at, oh, why are we spending so much on technology? So can we get more things from a single vendor? If you're leading IoT, you're thinking, why is my team implementing so many siloed products? Can we get more from a single vendor? And then as sales users, we're looking at, hey, could I get a consistent user interface, which would lead to fewer vendors? So I think every department is thinking about consolidating their sales stack. And as vendors, as people are buying each other and more vendors are expanding their platforms to provide functionality, I think sales platforms are absolutely what's happening today. And so for the vendors that provide part of that tech stack, it's important that they look at being a platform versus just a siloed vendor providing one type of function.
Yeah, agreed. So switching gears a little bit, knowing how few women there are in sales leadership, what advice do you have for women who want to do what you did and want to rise through the organization? Do you have, we're just talking about all the tips that we're probably going to share at a later date, but
yes,
for now, what are maybe your top couple tips for being maybe in an environment that you're not fully 100% comfortable in? Is it worth it? When do you know that your environment is not really serving you, I guess, is one question I would have.
Okay. I think for that question, you have to feel accepted, right? You do have to feel like you belong, even if you happen to be the only woman and it happens to be all men in the organization or as a leader. That happens. It still happens in sales, whether it's intentional or maybe it's inherited and somebody is trying to change it. If you don't feel accepted and you're always being talked over or your ideas are being ignored and they're not necessarily trying to be more diverse, I think you have to reconsider where you are. But if you do feel accepted and included and your leadership is listening to your ideas along with everybody else's ideas, then I think it's a good place where you can grow and you should stay because they're probably invested in making it more diverse and more accepting in that area. But you do definitely have to look at where you are and making sure the culture really focuses on diversity. I will say, for example, at Cloudflare, one of our values is embracing diversity. And people are not just evaluated on their performance. They're also evaluated on their behaviors, which includes adhering to our values. So I really like that. It's one thing I really like about being at Cloudflare. And not all companies operate that way.
Culture is really important, and knowing who you're reporting to, I think, is important. And knowing that's someone who will help you grow, and support you. We're doing a summit on April 6th on mentorship. And I wonder, did you have a great mentor or have you had many mentors over your career?
I had a fabulous mentor very early in my career. This was back, should I say how long ago it was? It was back in the 90s, late 90s, I'll say that. He was absolutely fabulous. He was our CRO and he just took me under his wing. I didn't ask for that. At that time, I don't think I actually knew what a mentor was or a sponsor. So I was really fortunate that he took me under his wing and really helped mentor and sponsor me, not only in the role I was in, but he actually approached me when I wasn't reporting to him. There was an acquisition. He said, look, I think you'd be great over here in this job. He had some turnover. And I said, but I didn't know anything about that. He goes, don't worry, you're smart. You'll figure it out and you can ask me.
Yeah.
Which was awesome. So turned out I changed roles and knock on wood, I did a fabulous job. And then a couple of years later, they were actually looking at bringing in a gray hair. And I won't talk about that now because they wanted somebody who had grown it even bigger than I was able to grow it in 2 years. I was a little bit irritated. And I was talking to the same gentleman. He said, thinking about this other role over here. And he goes, I'm thinking about who would be good in that role. I'm like, oh, I could do that. But the interesting thing about it is I'd never done that role either. And that role was to build an inside sales team. And back then it was before inside sales was a thing.
Right.
And the thing is, 2 years prior, I said, I've never done that before. I don't know if I could do it. And suddenly, because of his belief in me, it was like, I can do that because I felt like I could do anything.
Yeah.
And of course, that spawned a very long career in a specialty area inside sales.
Yeah.
So I think having somebody believe in you is critical. So he was probably the most impactful mentor. Since then, yes, I've had other mentors, but probably for shorter periods of time. And in some cases, they weren't necessarily a direct supervisor. They were in other roles. But I do think it's critical that people have not only mentors. So I'm actually looking forward to your session on the 6th.
Yeah.
Also sponsors, right? There's a difference. Sometimes you can be both.
And tell our audience what a sponsor does.
Okay. So yeah, a mentor obviously is somebody who's coaching you. A sponsor is somebody who's helping you get more visibility and sponsoring you into opportunities, whether that's a potentially new role, a bigger role, or just more visibility to your company. They're actually more pushing you up versus mentors are saying, oh, I think you should do X, Y, and Z.
Right.
And so somebody could be both or one or the other. And I think people who are looking for that, they just need to know the difference and they need to know what are they asking this person to do for them? Are you asking them to mentor you, to sponsor you, or to be both when you go ask somebody? And that's another thing. Don't be afraid to ask a person to be your mentor or your sponsor. Because if you don't ask, people don't usually just come and offer to do that. I was really lucky, but it doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And now you mentor all sorts of people.
I try
over the years, right?
Yes.
So the last question I always like to ask is a book or podcast or something that you are reading or just read that you recommend.
Okay. So I'm going to be a little selfish here. I'll give you 2. So I have my own book, which is 42 Rules for Building a High Velocity Inside Sales Team. Now, granted, it was published in 2014, but I'm currently publishing updates on my LinkedIn feed to some chapters. Obviously, I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
But recently, I've been reading this book, and I think it's so perfect for today's economic environment. It's called The Jolt Effect. How performers overcome customer indecision. Because right now, and you and I were talking about this before we started recording, there's a lot of customer indecision with the current economic environment. And that's by Matthew Dixon and Ted McKenna. So I do recommend that book. It's very good for today's environment.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I like that book as well. Really good. Lori, it's been a pleasure to have you here and excited. I'll be looking at your LinkedIn updates because I want to see all those reasons. There are 42 of them, right?
Yeah.
42 tips. That's fantastic. Lori Harmon from Cloudflare. And thank you so much and continued success with your career.
Thank you, Lori. Great seeing you and loved catching up with you. We'll talk again later.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conversations with Women in Sales. You can find all of our episodes at womensalespros.com/podcast. Help us spread the word and let's change the face of B2B sales.